When the HOA president's fixation on her neighbor erupted into arson, the neighborhood assumed the blaze was the climax. They weren't ready for what came next, her face-to-face reckoning with the man she'd targeted inside his courtroom. "The court will come to order. All rise," the bailiff called, his voice cutting through the packed chamber. The heavy rear doors swung open and the defendant entered in a county jumpsuit, wrists chained. Evelyn Vance shuffled forward, eyes flicking from the gallery to the bench as if hunting for a friendly gaze to anchor her. What she found instead made her falter. Seated in black robes, composed but unsmiling, was Judge David Chen, the very homeowner whose house had been reduced to cinders days earlier. The air felt charged, like the prickle before lightning. A murmur rippled through the spectators at the coincidence-turned-cruel twist. Evelyn's knees dipped. A deputy steadied her and guided her to a chair. David met her gaze. His stare was level, unreadable, yet behind it sat the weight of a man who'd lost nearly everything: home, keepsakes, any sense of safety, because of the woman now seated before him. Silence stretched. Then David's baritone broke it. "Be seated." Wood benches groaned as everyone sat. It was so still you could hear reporters' pens tick. Evelyn's attorney leaned in close, whispering hard, "Don't look at him. Eyes on me." Too late. Everyone had already witnessed that charged first glance between judge and accused. Only a week prior, this cul-de-sac had argued about hedges, porch bulbs, and parking. Now they stared at the aftermath of a hate-fueled act that could have killed. David held himself steady, though inside a storm churned. Flashes of that night. The crackle, the smoke, neighbors shouting his name. He remembered gripping his briefcase, one of the few things he'd saved, while his roof folded into glowing ruin. And there she was, the same woman who started with mailbox colors, who sneered at his wave, who filed complaint upon complaint, who chose fire to make her grievance permanent. Evelyn sat rigid, jaw set. The tremor in her hands betrayed the fear. It felt cinematic, but this was no film. Reporters scribbled, a neighbor covered her mouth in disbelief. David inhaled, slow and deliberate. Every word he spoke would be scrutinized. Could he be fair while judging the person who tried to erase him? Evelyn's lawyer rose. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty." The words hung like smoke. Everyone knew the investigator's findings: the gas can near the fence, the camera footage of her car circling. David's face stayed neutral, though the denial stung. For a heartbeat, Evelyn glanced up and he caught it. A flicker of satisfaction, as if forcing him into this seat was its own victory. He pressed his lips together, folded his hands, and said evenly, "Very well. Plea is entered. We will proceed." Before we go deeper, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and if you believe no one should ever watch their home reduced to ashes because of prejudice and hate, then hit that like button and subscribe to Story Arc. Because when fire destroys more than wood and brick, it tests whether justice can rise from the ruins. Everyone in that chamber sensed it. This wasn't a routine docket call, but the fuse hadn't been lit in court. It had been smoldering for months on quiet streets behind clipped hedges long before cameras crowded the courthouse steps. Austin, Texas, close enough to the city for traffic on the breeze, slow enough for neighbors to wave. That balance drew Judge David Chen to a brick two-story he hoped would be refuge, demanding days at Travis County's courthouse, soft evenings on a swept porch. He kept the grass tight, the walkway clean, the porch light a small halo at night. A man's house, he believed, should be sanctuary, not a place someone peers into. Enter Evelyn Vance, HOA president. To some, she kept order. To others, she treated bylaws like scripture. Grass at regulation height, mailboxes one sanctioned shade of black, porch lights dark by 11. Their first clash was over that porch light. David was watering the front beds when she marched up, clipboard tucked, lips set. "Judge Chen, your porch light stays on too late." He set down the hose. "Good evening to you as well, Miss Vance. It's for security. It shuts off around midnight." She shook her head. "Rules say 11. You're disrupting the neighborhood." He'd heard plenty of sharp tones in court. This didn't sound like neutral enforcement. It sounded personal. "Noted," he said, calm as a bench order. "I'll review it. It should have ended there. It didn't." A week later, a letter, hedges above height limits. Days after, mailbox color inconsistent with approved palette. David chuckled to his friend Leo Hernandez over the phone. If this is her biggest problem, maybe this place is too perfect, Leo snorted. She sounds like the type to measure blades of grass. The joke didn't erase the pressure. Visits, letters, stares from across the street, humidity before a storm. Neighbors noticed. Retired teacher Sarah Jenkins murmured at the mailboxes, "She doesn't bother anyone else like this. Only you." Strange. Maybe I'm unlucky, David shrugged. Unlucky doesn't mean 3 letters in a month, Sarah said. The pattern sharpened. Photos snapped. If he parked inches off, guests were timed. What looked like standards began to feel like fixation. Still, at meetings, few spoke up. Evelyn was loud, relentless, and most preferred to avoid the fight. One evening, his sister Jessica came for dinner. She eyed the stack of notices. "All this from the HOA?" "Every one," David said. "Same hand, same signature." "You're a judge, David. High-profile cases. You sure this isn't more than rules?" He paused at the stove. "I've wondered. I won't assume the worst. I'll keep steady." But Evelyn wasn't steadying. Each complaint, each glare, laid another brick. Behind closed doors, her muttering turned darker. Neighbors heard her at HOA meetings. He thinks he's above everyone. David tried to live above it, work, family, quiet nights, but her shadow kept lengthening. And this was only the prelude. Her fixation was about to cross from nuisance to danger. By the time summer rolled in, Evelyn's hostility was unmistakable. One evening, David came home late from the courthouse, jacket slung over his shoulder, tie loose after a long day. He'd barely closed his car door when Evelyn's voice rang out from her porch. "You think you're better than us, Judge?" David paused, keys in hand. "I've just worked a long day, Miss Vance," he replied evenly. "Why don't we leave it at that?" But she pressed on. "You think you can bend the rules because of who you are, but I see through it. I always have." He didn't respond. He walked inside, locking the door behind him. Later, while Jessica sat with him in the living room, a sharp thud hit the front door. They both froze. Checking the camera feed, David saw it, a small rock on the mat. Evelyn's shadow lingered at the edge of the frame before fading into darkness. "This is harassment," Jessica said, her voice rising. "I'm documenting everything," David told her calmly. "But until she crosses into criminal territory, it's just nuisance." Jessica shook her head. "It's not nuisance. She's testing you, testing how far she can go." And she was right. Evelyn's behavior grew bolder. Neighbors reported hearing her muttering on nightly walks, sometimes spitting. "He doesn't belong here. Not here. Not ever." Weeks later, that breaking point came on a humid Thursday night in late July. The air outside was heavy, cicadas buzzing restlessly. David had just finished reviewing sentencing notes, stacking them neatly on his desk before turning off the lamp and heading upstairs. Jessica had left after dinner, leaving the house quiet. At 2 a.m., the first sign came. A faint crackling, like dry twigs snapping. Then the unmistakable smell of smoke seeping into his bedroom. David's eyes snapped open. "Smoke," he muttered, coughing as his lungs filled with heat. Stumbling into the hallway, he found the staircase already swallowed in gray clouds. The alarm shrieked through the house. He rushed back, grabbed his phone, and dialed 911. His voice was hoarse. The dispatcher stayed calm. "Sir, get out immediately. Crews are on their way." Crouching low, David pushed toward the front door, heat licking at his skin. Sparks popped like gunfire. By the time he reached the entryway, flames were visible, gnawing at photos, paint, wood. He shoved the door open, stumbling into the night, coughing violently. Across the street, neighbors spilled out in panic. "David!" Sarah Jenkins screamed, rushing forward with her husband. They pulled him onto the curb. Within minutes, sirens wailed. Engines screamed to a halt, firefighters dragging hoses, barking commands. Water clashed against flame in a roar. Barefoot, shaking, David stood on the curb, clutching the only thing he'd managed to save, his briefcase. Inside were court files. Everything else, his wife Maria's hydrangea notes, framed family photos, the old armchair where he read at night, was gone, devoured by fire. Paul arrived minutes later, gripping David's shoulder. "My God, Dave, you okay? Breathing?" David's voice rasped. His eyes never left the inferno. "She did this. I know she did." Paul's jaw tightened. Who else would? By dawn, his home was nothing more than a blackened skeleton, and the neighborhood realized Evelyn Vance had finally crossed the line. The fire marshal stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Preliminary signs point to arson," he said. "Accelerant along the fence line. This wasn't an accident." David nodded slowly. "I already knew." 2 days later, detectives knocked on Evelyn Vance's door. Footage from David's cameras and from two neighbors' doorbell systems showed her SUV circling his block just before the blaze. A search warrant turned up a half-empty gas can in her garage, traces matching the accelerant found at the scene. When officers led Evelyn away in handcuffs, neighbors gathered at the curb. She didn't hang her head or cry. She lifted her chin, her face tight, as if daring anyone to challenge her. "She looks proud of herself," Sarah whispered. But as devastating as the fire was, the true shock hadn't come yet. Days later, David would step into his own courtroom and face the woman who tried to erase him, this time as the defendant sitting at the table below his bench. The weight of that reality came crashing down days later when Evelyn stepped into his courtroom, shackled. Monday morning arrived with a storm of media vans crowding outside the Travis County Courthouse. Reporters jostled for position, cameras pointed at the doors where deputies would escort in the disgraced HOA president accused of arson. Inside, the gallery filled quickly. Residents from David's neighborhood slipped into benches, whispering in disbelief. Some came to see justice, others simply to confirm that what they'd heard was real. David entered through the side door, his black robe flowing, expression composed. He had done this countless times, but never before had the defendant been the very person who tried to erase his life. "All rise," the bailiff commanded. The heavy doors swung open. Two deputies led Evelyn forward in her county-issued jumpsuit, shackled wrists, pale face, but her chin lifted stubbornly. The room fell into complete silence. David kept his gaze steady, though every fiber of him remembered the smoke, the collapse, the roar of flames. Evelyn's eyes locked on his. For a split second, her steps faltered. The color drained from her cheeks. Then, just as quickly, she forced composure. But the tremor in her shoulders betrayed her. David cleared his throat, his voice carrying steady authority. "Court is now in session. Case of State versus Vance." A reporter in the back scribbled furiously, whispering to a colleague, "The judge is the victim. This is unheard of." Her attorney, Robert Finch, stood quickly, voice confident. "Your Honor, before proceedings move forward, we must address the obvious conflict. With respect, this case cannot continue under your jurisdiction." David's hands folded tightly on the bench. "That will be noted, but until reassignment is confirmed, I will preside over today's session." Evelyn's eyes widened. She muttered, "This is a setup." David leaned forward, his tone firm. "Miss Vance, you will remain silent unless spoken to." The arraignment pressed on. Robert rose, his voice steady. "My client pleads not guilty." The words hung in the air like smoke. David's expression didn't change, but inside, the denial stung. His home was gone, the evidence clear, and yet Evelyn still shook her head as if none of it had happened. The prosecutor outlined the charges: felony arson, criminal mischief, and possible hate crime enhancements. The weight of it echoed across the room. But it was Evelyn's reaction that rattled everyone. She smirked. For a fleeting moment, satisfaction flickered across her face. It chilled David more than the flames ever had. The trial had moved swiftly, with the prosecution laying out overwhelming evidence: surveillance footage, the recovered gas can, and testimony from neighbors who had witnessed Evelyn's harassment. Witnesses like Sarah Jenkins and Paul Miller spoke of her obsession, making it clear this wasn't about HOA rules but personal hatred. The defense tried to undermine credibility, even arguing for a mistrial because David was both victim and judge, but his calm denial of that motion carried weight. By closing arguments, the prosecutor framed the case as hate turned violent, while the defense painted Evelyn as misunderstood. But the jury's expressions were set, their focus unwavering. When the courtroom recessed for deliberation, everyone knew the verdict would come swiftly. The jury found Evelyn Vance guilty on all major charges: felony arson, property destruction, and aggravated harassment with hate crime enhancements. At sentencing, David addressed her directly. "You burned my home," he began, voice slow and measured. "You destroyed years of memories. You endangered not just me, but my neighbors. And why? Because you could not see me as your equal." Evelyn's lips quivered, but she said nothing. David's voice carried through the silent courtroom, each word deliberate. "I've spent my career believing in justice, believing it must remain blind, fair, and unwavering. But today I'm reminded that justice is not vengeance. It's truth. It's truth. And the truth here is undeniable. You chose hate. You chose violence, and now you must live with the consequences of your choices. The judge's gavel came down with one decisive strike. The sentence, 22 years in state prison, parole eligibility after 15. Her fire destroyed a house, but it couldn't destroy justice. 22 years is what it cost her, and a reminder that hate always burns out in the end. If you believe no family should ever see their home turned to ashes by prejudice, hit that like button and subscribe to Story Arc, because these stories prove that justice still stands, even when the walls fall.